Het is 16 januari 2019 en we gaan het doen in het Engels. It's January 16th, 2019. We're going to do this in English. Welcome to Potkaars. Now, Potkaars, you see this? Yeah. That's really podcast, only pronounced in Dutch. This is my guest, Raymond Johansen. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah, excellent.
Hi.
I don't know where you are. So where are you currently on the world?
Well, I'm quite a bit north of the polar circle. My neighbor is Santa Claus.
Your neighbor is Santa Claus. So that would be Finland? Norway?
No, it's Norway,
Right.
and I'm fibbing a little bit.
Right.
I live in a town called Bodo, which is north of the polar circle and halfway through the Norwegian long thin country.
Fair enough. So I'm in Holland, and I invited you to be my guest here. We met once in Germany for Pirate Party International, and only recently did you tell me about a group of people called Witness Against Torture, and their website witnessagainsttorture.com. And I asked, so you're knowledgeable on that. I'm not, so I asked you to come into the show and talk about what these people are doing and what countries are doing currently on torture. So, to start that off, could you define where that line is between torture and imprisonment? What is torture?
Yeah, the United Nations has done a lot of work on trying to define torture for us. The Americans don't listen, the Brits don't listen, but it goes a little bit something like this. Prolonged isolation or shoot, or as they call it in America, that means you get put in a cell and you don't get to interact with other people over an extended period of time. That is torture. Even my own country has been criticized by the EU and the UN for using isolation on prisoners. So I call that torture too. Isolation is torture. But torture is, of course, when somebody inflicts mental or physical pain on someone to obtain something. There is torture that is being done by organized criminals. That is what happened to me 15 years ago. I was kidnapped, extorted for money, and tortured for 8 hours, and it's the reason why this cause interests me. Now, there is something that is even worse, and that is state-sponsored torture. When countries decide that torture is a tool to use for fighting a war or obtaining something. And the Americans redefine torture to be something called enhanced interrogation, which basically is a sophisticated way of doing really bad things to people, like putting them in boxes, subjecting them to staying awake for 7 days in a row, humiliating them until they break. Now, the Americans also use black sites around the world, and the kind of torture that goes on there is physical, and people have died, like one of them under the guidance of the now new CIA director, Gina Haspel.
Okay. Before we get into that, and we will get into that, so what torture is clearly defined by United Nations, and your country and my country and the United States, as far as I know, have underwritten agreements that say that's something we don't do. We don't cross that red line. We do not engage in torture, either for punishment or for extracting information. So that's the formal position of things, right? Having said that, well, the United States at least is doing stuff or has done stuff that's documented in Guantanamo Bay, and currently, what we see on television is coming out of Saudi Arabia. And there's a situation with Raif Badawi that you have gotten to, you know that situation. So maybe you can elaborate on what's happened to him and what's happening in Saudi Arabia as another state.
Yeah, there are a lot of countries that that employ torture as a technique to get people to admit to crimes they didn't commit, as a way to get rid of opposition, somebody criticizing their government. Among those, the worst among those are Iran, and Saudi Arabia is worth mentioning because we've had Raif Badawi in the news for years and years now. I've been involved in the campaigns to try to get him released, him and his lawyer, and now lately his sister, Samar Badawi, a women's rights activist. And the torture he was subjected to was that he was convicted to many years in jail and 1,000 lashes. And they do that in a public place. He got this 50 first lashes on a Friday, I think 4 years ago. And that's when I got involved with that. It basically means they put people in a square, let people watch them getting hit by an instrument that really, really hurts the skin of the body. And of course, for him, as every other torture victim, the torture continues because it doesn't stop. When it stops, it continues within your head. He is still in jail and we're still fighting to get him out of Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thank you. So that's punishment, right? That's not extracting information. Now, well, we had the 9/11 situation where the American president at that time said, well, we need to put suspects somewhere, and then they ended up in Guantanamo Bay, right? How did that work?
Well, the story goes like this. Dick Cheney became vice president. He got himself a more powerful position than other vice presidents, and he pushed for these enhanced techniques of torture, and he made plans for an invasion of Iraq before 9/11 happened. Then 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden, all of Dick Cheney's wet dreams came true. They implemented procedures using actual doctors, physicians, to make the enhanced interrogation, the torture, more sophisticated. Then they started renditioning people, kidnapping people in foreign countries, and putting them in black sites all over the world. In addition, they figured out that Guantanamo Bay is a place where they could, well, imprison people and not follow the laws of the land. They could simply not give a fuck about due process and, having a lawyer or seeing a judge. So they put a lot of the 9/11 suspects in Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, so, but you're saying there's more of those sites than just the well-documented Guantanamo Bay then, that America uses?
Oh yes, there is a torture report. It was finished a couple of years ago. It went through. Well, it took a long time, and it's several thousand pages, most of which are redacted. But from those, we have learned that it was an actual private corporate industry that got tasked with making black sites around the world. The most famous one is in Poland, and that's where they put people to torture them. The second most well-known place is in Iraq. We have lots of photos from what went on there. Yeah. Some say that the Americans created terrorists by doing what they did, but that's a side note. Now, I think we are talking about over a dozen black sites. Now, Obama stopped. Obama said, we tortured some folks. Yeah. That got me really angry, but the way he said that, but then they shut down the black sites. Yeah. They have been exchanged with black sites in countries like Yemen. So they have moved even more underground, but they keep renditioning people, both the UK and the US, and they keep using torture to this day.
Let's get backstep a little bit into what you just said, because you mentioned Poland. as one of those sites where these things take place or have taken place currently. So that's in Europe, in EU. So that is that under European jurisdiction also, or is this like an American base and we don't touch it?
Well, the way the Americans work is, of course, by economic terrorism. They tell any country in the world what they want. If they don't get what they want, they downgrade them as trading partners. So the loss of income makes them say yes to anything. And by black site, we mean it's secret. Yeah. It wasn't supposed to become public knowledge that there was a black site in Poland. EU never did anything about it because they didn't know about it until later on. As far as I know, Poland has been shut down, but it went on in the middle of Europe, and a lot of people and leaders and rulers just closed their eyes, because they didn't want to oppose the war on terror that the Americans started.
But that's the choice countries currently are standing in front of. Take a position against the United States that we're talking about now, or Saudi Arabia for that matter, exporting oil, or let it be. So this was Poland. Then there's Guantanamo Bay, which is a military base in Cuba. It started in 1903, and it got these military prison facilities in 2002 following 9/11. And Obama said we're going to close it in 2009. And I agree with you. We tortured some folks is downplaying on a. But that's not something an American president, anybody in power is supposed to say. But anyway, he's supposed to shut it down. But then 2 years later, they backtracked on that. They're not shutting it down, and they're keeping it open indefinitely, right? So indefinite detention. So there's still people currently detained in Guantanamo Bay, right?
There are 50 people left. There have been maybe 4 times that many people there. And I don't think anyone in Guantanamo Bay has ever seen a judge. And a lot of them has been found innocent of anything. But the problem is, where do you send them? They are ready for release, but nobody wants to take them back. So I think that's the biggest challenge they have in closing it. What do you do with these people, and do you want them flying around the world and talk shows and telling people what really went on there?
So is that the reason they're still there? Because the information that they might provide once they get to talk to press or something?
Yes, that's of course just a theory of mine, a plausible theory of mine. But as I said, there's been conversations about this for a long time. There are people we know are innocent, and the Americans have trouble with where do we set them? Because who wants terrorists back in their country? Indonesia doesn't want their Indonesian Guantanamo Bay terrorists coming back to their country. So they're just saying to the Americans, keep them. We don't want anything to do with them.
Okay. So we leave that there for a little bit. We'll get back to that once we get to Witness Against Torture. Then you mentioned Yemen. So how does that come into play? There's a war being fought there currently. So, but that's also what you call black site?
Yes. I shouldn't be too specific. I want to say black sites, because that's what the plural. That's what the information I have gotten points towards. I cannot tell you where. I cannot tell you what they're called. A black site is a black site, but the Intercept have done some investigations, and I have talked to journalists in the UK that are attempting really hard to prove the fact that there are black sites in Yemen and in Jordan also. That's I think the favorite place where the UK rendition people. Um, and they have trouble. They have trouble proving it. If somebody has proved it, they have probably been shut down by their editors or their ad buyers. Who knows? But the number of people and the type of people, American soldiers on the ground in Yemen, is clear enough indication that they have serious activity there. Also, in black sites where torture goes on. Maybe, and just maybe, they are using the Yemeni states people to do the torture, and they only have a CIA, let's say, person helping them or teaching them or observing, supposedly not taking active part in the torture. But only a naive person would think that to be true.
Yeah. All right. So then we had back to Guantanamo Bay. We had Guantanamo Bay started holding people after 9/11. Then Obama saying we're going to close it, but he didn't. And then we had a new presidential campaign between Clinton and Trump. And now Donald Trump, during that campaign, was kind of positive in a way, maybe, on organizations like WikiLeaks, but that's changed, and then some people had some hopes that he might do something about Guantanamo Bay, and that's changed. So what's the position of the current presidency in the United States on these matters? Do you know?
First, may I say that Donald Trump is a clown, and there are a few people that I hate more, and he flips flops on everything.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an original thought. Also, I want to mention, as a part of an explanation before I start really answering your question, that people think that the U.S. presidents are omnipotent and are really strong and controls everything. Obama came into 2 terms and thought he was going to close Guantanamo Bay, but then he realized, oops, we have the CIA and everybody else wanting it to not be closed. So he did not manage to close it. The same is with Trump. If he said earlier that he was gonna close Guantanamo, if he did, maybe he believed it at the time. But when he met what some call the deep state, but what I call the bureaucracy, he soon learned he is not the boss.
That's that then. So he can have all the ambition that he like, but at the end of the day, well, he pretends that he's playing that he's ruling that country and the world, but in the end of the story is what you say is really not, and what some call deep state is, and amongst that is CIA, what you mentioned, because that would be one of those organizations. So Trump became new president in the United States in 2016. In that year, also, witnessagainsttorture.com got registered to DNS, and a group of people got together. Why at that time? Do you know?
I do not know the background of the core people of Witness Against Torture. I do not know them personally, but their focus has been Guantanamo, getting it closed. They have been doing activities, a lot of different activities, campaigns, trying to lobby to get people home, trying to help those that have been released, trying to get stories about those that have been there out into the media. It's a very professional organization that has impressed me much. Yesterday, they closed a very effective campaign. It was from the 9th to the 13th. And they did an action in Washington, D.C., in front of the White House and the Supreme Court. As far as I know, only 5 people got arrested during that, and there was quite a lot of media attention. I only helped a little bit with signal boosting this across social media and communicating with them to understand where they wanted to go. It is an organization that I respect deeply, and I wish more people supported them because they're the only one I see that does effective work in this regard.
Yeah. So, what is the effective bit of it then? What do they do that has effect?
Well, that it means keeping the closing of Guantanamo Bay uh, in the newspapers so that people are aware of it. Uh, it is always the most important thing. If you want something bad to stop, you have to find a way to get enough people to be against it,
Yeah.
so that you can put pressure on a government to end something like Guantanamo Bay.
So that's public opinion. That's their aim, and that's why they're out on the street in front of the White House, demonstrating, gaining media attention. Right?
Yes, yes, they have several more goals, but I am not the right person to be a voice for them.
No. So, if I want to, yeah. So this is for my part. This is made in the Netherlands. This is never in the news, right? We were talking about Guantanamo Bay back in the day when Obama wanted to close it and said we torture some folks, and then it went away and it's not being talked about. So as far as Holland is concerned, I'm assuming nobody thinks it's still opened and there's still people held without trial, let alone what happened in Poland, or let alone what's currently happening in Yemen. The entire war in Yemen is not being reported on. So if we want to raise more awareness on this and on these people, do you have an idea how we could go about that?
Well, there is only one way, and that is to try to increase public opinion's awareness of how incredibly evil state-sponsored torture really is. And at some points we have to start standing up against the Americans. When it comes to Holland, if you don't mind if I comment on Holland, Holland, like Norway, is very subservient to the Americans, and your intelligence services are cooperating daily with the American intelligence services. There seemed to be some kind of a dependency, and the silence in the media in Holland about Guantanamo and about torture is connected to that, I think.
Yeah, oh, I agree. And Ed Snowden made that point, specifically discussing the Dutch services, saying, well, they're sock puppets to America. And I agree, that's the impression you get here as well. So, welcome to my country. You don't speak that favorable of your own country in that regard, so we can shake hands there. And I agree, it's public opinion more than anything else that might change this. But yeah, then again, these guys have the big media as well. So we'll have to do it ourselves then. So yeah, that's. Now I wanted to say something about Trump, because I agree what you said earlier, that he appears not to take a position and then stand by it. He's just an opportunist that goes, well, let's say, for example, I want to dominate world trade, whatever, we have the trade sanctions. And he goes, well, my gun's bigger than yours, so I'll impose more sanctions, or I'll impose more tariffs, and see who's going to win. And he's going to do that on every topic. And if it's going into the topic of dealing with prisoners or torturing, well, that's what he'll do also. And he went on record. There's recordings of him saying, well, if they torture, we torture harder. They chop off heads, well, we have to fight them medieval style then. So there's no moral part in that at all. He'll just use his bigger gun if he has it. So that's a threat of Trump right there. So I'm not saying Obama's approach worked. Like, I'm going to try close Guantanamo Bay, and he didn't fix it either. But Trump claims he's got a bigger gun, but he's up to what we call deep state, CIA. So, and you're claiming he's going to lose, or he's lost already.
Yeah, there's little he can do. You can pretend all he like that he's the big boss, but he is so disliked in his own party hand in the 17 intelligence agencies, and of course, all of the parts of the bureaucracy that still are beholden to the Democratic Party after 8 years with Obama.
Yeah. So is there information coming out of CIA currently? I mean, I mentioned Snowden, and there's yeah. So how do we learn what the current situation is then? So you mentioned John Kiliako.
Yeah, well, we need transparency, or we need to enforce transparency. Some people call it hacking. I call it enforced transparency. That means that a tight-lipped organization like the CIA, you have to hack them to show the world what crimes they are committing. That's the only way you can stop them from doing something. I mentioned John Kiriakou to you before we started recording, simply because he was towards the top of the CIA, and then when they wanted to start torturing some folks, to quote Obama, he was asked to take part in coordinating those efforts. As the only one within CIA, he said no. That went over the red line. He couldn't do it. And then he told the world about torture and the torture that was happening. And he continues to talk about it to this day. I'm hoping that we can have him visit us on one of your future podcasts, because he's not only an impressive man, he has all the details and all the answers that we need. He will never break secrecy acts and say something that will land him in jail. But he will be able to shine a light on things much better than you or I can. We'll see later today if he has the time.
Well, that's the whole idea of this podcast series. If you know what's going on, if you can get the information out, then you know what to do about it, maybe, and get some public attention, just like the people of Witness Against Torture are trying to gain out in the street in front of the White House in the United States. So, thanks, Ray, for having this talk. Anything else you want to add to this conversation at this time?
No, I think we covered the important points, and I think this is a good time to for me to say thank you for having me, and well, see you next time.
Yeah, so I messed up a little bit here with my little keypad thingy, so I moved you to the side for my tune. I'll do this without the tune this time, and say thank you, Ray, and we'll talk soon. And normally the guest kills the candle, but I'll do the honors here. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.